All right. Good morning.
Good morning. Morning.
Let's go ahead and pray and get started. And we'll continue our discourse in the book of Daniel, chapter 2. Let's pray and then we'll begin. Oh, Lord, thank you so much again for the opportunity that we have to study your word and to do so freely. Pray, God, that this would be beneficial and instructive, and that you would be glorified overall in this. Thank you again for who you are and for what you do. It's in your son's name. Amen. Okay. So this morning, we will continue again our discourse as we go through the book of Daniel. And this time we will be getting into the content of the book. We didn't really get into that last week because there was a question that I had to answer concerning why the language switches from Hebrew to Aramaic from verse 4. And I mentioned last Sunday it was a thinking cap Sunday. We had to dig a little deep, look at some of the culture, look at the history, look at how language has changed over time. I will continue to bring this up, particularly in this section, as we look at some Aramaic words and how they correspond with the Hebrew. Some of the words that are in Aramaic are taken from the Hebrew as well. And we'll kind of explain that as we go along. I attempted to give an explanation as to why this was important last week. And at the end of the discourse, which if you have not seen it, I would encourage you to go back and listen to it so you can kind of hear my full explanation. But here are a little bit of the highlights of why I believe why this switches from Hebrew to Aramaic in verse 4. First of all, Aramaic was the dominant language that was used when Israel was in captivity and all over the place. The language of the Jews, that is Hebrew, was more regional, whereas Aramaic was widely used everywhere within the known world at that time. Daniel, I believe, was Daniel's language was to communicate to the Babylonians and the Persians through their rulers. Daniel wrote in Aramaic, maybe that would get some traction. If this is about Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon, and his influence is more greater than even Daniel's, right? Throughout time and memoriam, that the God of the Hebrews was the living God, that is King Nebuchadnezzar, Belshazzar, and King Darius, that is those kings that are mentioned throughout the book of Daniel. The Jews who were unaware of their native language would still hear about the God of Daniel. We read after a generation has passed that they've assimilated into Babylon. They know the language, they know the customs, and they're probably not aware of the Hebrew language, at least not as frequently as they were with the generation before them. So they would have a clear knowledge of who Nebuchadnezzar was, the language, and this would, again, impact them to hear about the God of Daniel and the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. 2, the language was a reminder that solidified the Jews in their time in Babylon that was complete or came to pass. And last, it reinforced that God had a plan for the Gentile empires that he discussed using their native language. If you recall, in Jeremiah 10, verse 11, the only statement that is written in Aramaic tells basically, when I send you into the land, this is what you're going to say to them while you live there, right? That they would hear about the God of Israel through their own native tongue. Again, which was once more a full-throated attack on the false god Marduk. Every time I look at this text, I am almost certain that this is the case. That every single account that Daniel brings up is a slap in the face of this false deity, the one that rules over the time. And we'll continue underscoring this as we go on. And then lastly, the last point, switching back to Hebrew, particularly in chapter 8, underscored how important it is to discuss the destiny of Israel as a nation in their own native language. He could have wrote the whole thing in Aramaic. But I find it very fascinating that the first chapter deals again with the captivity of Israel in Babylon. That begins the Hebrew, and then it starts again in chapter 8 dealing with some of the historical high points and even low points of Israel during their entire history. Fascinating. Okay, let's go ahead and jump into the text, Daniel chapter 2, verse 1. Now that we kind of have maybe an explanation of why the language switches in chapter 2, verse 4, let's go ahead and read verse 1, and then we'll make some observations. Now, there's not much here within chapter 2. The action doesn't get started till about the middle of the chapter. However, there's some interesting details here. So I will go rather quickly in this case. Daniel chapter 2, verse 1. Now, in the second year of King Nebuchadnezzar's reign, he had dreams, and his spirit was troubled, and his sleep left him. Again, in chapter 2, verse 1, we come across another historical marker. The first historical marker was found in chapter 1, verse 1, when Israel was placed in captivity. Now we get another historical marker concerning, again, Nebuchadnezzar. Nebuchadnezzar was the raider and the captor of Israel and bringing them back to Babylon. Now we see in the second year of his reign, he had dreams, and his spirit was troubled. There are two important reasons why this historical marker is here, I'm convinced of. First, this underscores a time marker and the event that occurred during Babylonian history. This is part of the Babylonians' history, that Nebuchadnezzar had these dreams. It's not just also Israelite history too. Why? Because this involves, again, Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon. Okay? We see a time marker concerning the second year of his reign, right? And again, this marks the time when King Nebuchadnezzar began to have his dreams. Now, these are not just dreams that we would have, right? These are dreams that are sourced from God. These are dreams that God is giving to Nebuchadnezzar. So within this timeline here, we have 602 BC. 602 BC, if we're continuing to look at this timeline and the trajectory of Daniel while he was in Babylon, as well as the nation of Israel, the Jewish people, we find that Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah complete their royal court training. Their names are changed to reflect again the gods of Babylon. And Daniel at this time is 19, according to this timeline. Okay. We come to 601 BC. This is the second year of Nebuchadnezzar's reign. He began to have dreams from God, and now Daniel has crossed the threshold into 20. So this is about a year after Daniel and them have completed their court training. They're already in practice serving the king. As I mentioned before, these dreams are not sourced in his human activity or will or his mind or anything else like that. These dreams are sourced in God. The Hebrew word for dreams is the word kalam. 29 times it occurs in the Hebrew text, and twice it occurs in the book of Daniel. Chapter 1 is where its first occurrence is, and this time here. It is translated as dreams or dreams. Now, this word can mean a person having a dream just generally. Okay? Or it can be that a person has this dream supernaturally by God. This is important to know because in chapter 1, it is underscored that Daniel was able to explain these dreams by God himself, or through the explanation that he would give Daniel. Now, because Nebuchadnezzar had these particular dreams, we see the state or the disposition of Nebuchadnezzar. says that his spirit was troubled and his sleep left him. He could not get any sleep. This kind of left him in having insomnia, thinking about what he just witnessed. This word here, troubled, is panam. 4 times it occurs in the Hebrew scriptures, and it occurs twice in the book of Daniel. This word panam could be translated troubled, agitated, as in stirred in disposition, or anxious, not able to sit still, or frustrated about something. Again, this underscores the state of being. And I mention it like that because it doesn't just include the feelings and the emotions that Nebuchadnezzar is experiencing, but also the thoughts as well. You can kind of picture Nebuchadnezzar pacing back and forth, right? In his room or amongst his court, scratching his head, like, what in the world did I just dream? This is unusual. This also underscored that Nebuchadnezzar had a clear, detailed description of the dream. He knew exactly every detail, which is important throughout this historical narrative. So, of course, if his spirit is troubled about this, he realizes that this is pretty unusual. And, of course, he wants to know what this is about, why he had this dream, and what it means. This is where we get to Daniel chapter 2, verses 2 and 3. Then the king gave orders to call the magicians, the conjurers, the sorcerers, and the Chaldeans to tell the king his dreams. So they came in and stood before the king. And the king said to them, I had a dream, and my spirit is anxious. There's that word, panam, to understand the dream here. So being in this state, he gave sayings or orders to call those who could give him knowledge to understand this dream. And he calls 4 individuals, right? Magicians, conjurers, sorcerers, and the Chaldeans. We're going to look at 3 particular individuals here. This is where we take a cultural detour because these are the same words that are used in Daniel chapter 1, specifically magicians and conjurers. Okay? Let's take a look at what these individuals, what they did, specifically these magicians, conjurers, and sorcerers. Okay? First of all, they were part of the religious order of Babylonian life. They were used all the time, frequently. Okay, not just by Nebuchadnezzar, although he would use them frequently, but also by the satraps, the governors, those who had power. They would use these individuals. Okay. The concept of the divine or having these particular deities was known to be a variety of protective gods, demigods, kind of think of Hercules in this case, right? Half god, half human, type of deal. And demigods like wicked demons and phantasms, ghosts, okay, spooks, things of that nature, okay? As a result of this, they were very highly superstitious, and they would honor these gods in particular ways. One of them was the Etemenaki, right? That huge ziggurat in the center of Babylon, the city. But they would also wear amulets. They would wear bracelets. They would wear necklaces. They would build personal shrines for these various gods, probably within their homes and their residences, and that they would honor and recognize, okay? Another thing that they would do too, and I mentioned this before, is that they would include their personal names. Just like we name our children after historical, cultural figures in Scripture: David, Daniel, Mark, Luke, Paul, these individuals. They would do the same thing with the Babylonian gods. We know this because we see Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego and Daniel were named after these deities as well as Nebuchadnezzar. Okay. Let's take a look at some of these individuals and what they did. Okay. The Hebrew word for a magician is the word karton. Okay. The root word of karton is the word karet, meaning engraving tool or pen. Okay. Now, this is very fascinating because the magician in this particular culture was a specialist who would write out particular spells and omens and would interpret them, usually by reading the entrails of an animal in a bowl. Okay, so they would take the entrails of the animal. Sometimes they would dip it in its blood. They would write out what they saw in the entrails, and then they would give it to either the king or the person in high authority. Again, they would oftentimes write out omens and collect them. So they would collect these particular writings and these particular sayings that these magicians would do, and they would put them in a collection of a booklet. And so whenever something came up, they would actually go back to past predictions and past things and look them up and see whether or not these things came to pass, or they would even add to them. All right. That was the role of the magician. How about the conjurer? Asaph is the Hebrew word here. This word conjurer could be more accurately translated as a witch. Okay. So you had the individuals who would look at entrails, and then you had other individuals who would practice incantations, spells. These were your spellcasters. Okay. They would either do it for beneficial purposes, for healing, protection from other false deities. Like, let's say the king is going to go into another region. They would put a spell of protection on him, right? Just in case. Okay. And it was, or for evil purposes, to curse another individual, right? These group of witches included both male and female groups. I'm convinced that it was probably more males in this case here, within this particular group that Nebuchadnezzar is talking to. But the male Kasifu and female Kasifu, they are consisted of both groups. Okay, so Kasif is just a general term for conjurers. Okay. Then you have the sorcerers, which is very similar, almost similar to the Hebrew word for conjurers. Kasif is the Hebrew word for sorcerers. So you have the magicians, you have the sorcerers, the one that would cast spells, or I'm sorry, the conjurers, the one who would cast spells, and then you have the sorcerer. This word in Hebrew, although the word is translated sorcerer, I would say that it's more clearer if you translated this either as enchanter or astrologer. Well, why is that more clear? Well, they have the same kind of duty as a conjurer, that is, that witch, right? However, they would cast spells not due to writing particular spells or omens or things like that, but they would mostly cast spells and read omens based on the astrological signs. Okay. So they would look at the stars, see the alignment of the stars, the positioning of the stars, and then they would make their predictions based upon that. Think of astrology, for example, right? So he gathered all of these individuals together, all of these people. And he says this, hey, could you tell me what this dream meant, or what this dream is? In verse 4, he says, my spirit is troubled, and I want to know the explanation of this dream. Then the Chaldean spoke to the king in Aramaic. O king, live forever. Tell the dream to your servants, and we will declare the explanation. Again, the magician, astrologers, and the diviners, what he would do is detail the explanation, and then they would do whatever it is they did. They would read either the entrails, they would write it down, they would look at the astrological chart, they would do all of these things, and then based upon their duty, they would explain or interpret this dream. Okay? So the magicians, astrologers, diviners, and even the Chaldeans of these false deities give him praise and request that Nebuchadnezzar give the details of the dream and that they would explain what it means. By the way, this is very common, okay? Nebuchadnezzar would, most of the kings or the other kings of Babylon would tell the dream to them, and then they would explain it, okay? But Nebuchadnezzar is going to do something very unique here. He's going to buck the system. In verse 5, he says this, the king replied to the Chaldeans, the command from me is firm. If you do not make known to me the dream and its interpretation, you will be torn limb from limb, and your houses will be made a rubbish heap. Wow, that's rather extreme. However, this is kind of different. Nebuchadnezzar seemingly getting upset, saying the command or a word is certain. He's not backing down from this. Not only, you need to tell me what the dream is. I'm not going to tell you what it is. You need to tell me what it is. Okay? Again, this is highly unusual because most kings would not do this. Okay? But this is rather important. Nebuchadnezzar knows this. And so he says, look, I need you to tell me what this dream is. If you don't, you're a dead man, right? All of you. As a matter of fact, limb from limb is the word hadam here. It occurs 2 times in the Hebrew scriptures, which is right here. The Aramaic word, again, occurs 2 times in the book of Daniel. It is only found here. And this underscores that a person or a thing is cut. They are torn to pieces. They're dismembered. Okay? So if you don't tell me this, and I'm sure that there are many conjurers, many sorcerers. This isn't just a group of 5 or 2. This is a whole court of them. If you don't tell me this, you're going to be torn, all of you, from limb to limb. The historical account continues in verses 6 and 7. It says, but if you declare the dream and its interpretation, you will receive from me gifts and a reward and great honor. Therefore, declare to me the dream and its interpretation. They answered a second time and said, let the king tell the dream to his servants, and we'll declare the interpretation. Maybe Nebuchadnezzar didn't hear that right. Maybe I need to repeat this, right? Again, their repetition of this underscores that this is unusual. A king doesn't do this. A king tells the dream, and then we'll let you know what it is. He wants them to tell them what the dream is that he had. Nebuchadnezzar replied what he said once more in verse 5. He not only wants the interpretation or the explanation of the dream, but he wants the details themselves of the dream. Nebuchadnezzar then says that this person will receive a reward, or generosity is the Aramaic word here, or in great fame. They will be recognized throughout the kingdom of Babylon, right? If they can do this. Once more, the diviners, astrologers, And the enchanters or the conjurers stayed once more to describe to them the dream to him, and they would explain it. Again, perhaps he didn't hear that. Maybe we need to repeat this again. In a rather humorous statement in verse 8 and 9 that we come to, this is kind of fun. Nebuchadnezzar says this. He goes, I know for certain that you're bargaining for time, inasmuch as you've seen that the command from me is firm, that if you do not make the dream known for me, there is only one decree for you. For you have agreed together to speak lying and corrupt words before me until the situation is changed. Therefore, tell me the dream, that I may know that you can declare for me its interpretation. Fascinating statement. Nebuchadnezzar, based upon his statement, replied that he knows truthfully that they're buying time. I know that you guys are buying time. He then mentions that the command remains and that there's only one decree for them. If they do not complete this, they're dead. That's it. Then Nebuchadnezzar says something interesting. He says that all of them are colluding and concocting a story before him they can tell him, and continue to string him along until the situation or the time changes. Maybe we can, I know that you guys are colluding against me to buy time. Maybe I'll make up my mind or something. I'm not making up my mind on this. You need to tell me this like today, right? Again, this is why he's asking for the details of the dream first before the explanation. Because if he were to give the dream, they can make anything up, right? I see. This is that, right? No. We're not going to do this time. Not this time. This is too important. Which begs the question: if you're asking this of your conjurers and sorcerers, are they any use to you? Like you're kind of just saying that they're all useless, essentially. So why even keep them? Anyway. Verse 10. The Chaldeans answered the king and said, very interesting statement, there is not a man on earth who could declare the matter for the king, inasmuch as no great king or ruler has ever asked anything like this of a magician, conjurer, or even a Chaldean within the residence. What an admission. First, the Chaldeans, that is the astrologers, diviners of false deities, and the magicians, state that there's no person on the face of the land that could give a matter of this magnitude to Nebuchadnezzar. Additionally, there is not a strong ruler or a great king in Babylonian history that has asked for this. That's incredible, right? Go through the annals of Babylonian history. You will not find a request like this from any king, right? Like I said, this is not a practice that is generally done. The dream is given and the interpretation is given after that. Given the details of the dream he wants them to come up with, it's never happened. This had to be one of the most truthful statements that they've ever told. Okay? They've ever said, no one could do this, right? This is the true statement. If that's the case, then what does that say about the deities you worship? Verse 11, they continue explaining this. Moreover, the thing which the king demands is difficult, and there's no one who can declare it to the king except God's, whose dwelling place is not with mortal flesh. What an admission. There's some cool things going on here. Let's take a look at some of the words. First of all, the word difficult is the word yakir. Now, I mentioned this is a Hebrew word, but it's not a Hebrew word. It's an Aramaic word, which occurs twice in the Hebrew scriptures. Once in the book of Daniel. The other time it occurs in Ezra, I believe. It is translated difficult, noble, or rare. In the context of this statement that these individuals are making to Nebuchadnezzar is discussing that what he is asking is impossible. It's not just difficult. It's not just hard, right? It is impossible for them to do. They cannot do it. They basically admit it as such. The word gods here in this text is the Aramaic word elah. It occurs 53 times in the book of Daniel alone, okay? From chapter 2 all the way to chapter 7. It is translated gods or God, again, referring to a deity of some type. The root Aramaic word is aloha, not aloha, okay? Eloha. This word is used 4 times in Daniel, again, to discuss false deities. And this root is more likely an elongated form of the Hebrew word El. El is the singular form for God. Okay, this is the plural form in Aramaic. Okay? As I mentioned before, in the context of this passage, this is not only talking about all the false deities, that is Nabu, and all of the ones that we mentioned in our introduction, but it also includes the living God Marduk. You know, the one who created heaven and earth from the Babylonian perspective, that includes him too. The great God that created heaven and earth cannot even reveal this to Nebuchadnezzar. How about the word dwelling place? Dwelling place is Medor. This word occurs 4 times in the Hebrew scriptures, 4 times in the book of Daniel. I'm sorry, this Aramaic word. In the context, the wise men are discussing all the false deities of Babylon, right? Remember, the Etemenaki is not their dwelling place. That is the place that they honor those false deities, but it's not their dwelling place, okay? Their dwelling place, they mention, is not with mortal flesh, okay? What I find fascinating about this statement that the wise men of Babylon say is they cannot reveal the details of the dream because they are not the gods of Babylon, and their habitation is not with humankind. Again, this shows you that the Babylonians were unaware about the God of Israel. The God of Israel, the true God, dwelled with Israel in the temple. And they would go to God to appeal for various things by way of the priests. They're unaware of this. They're unaware of the history of Israel. As far as they're concerned, their God is conquered, and his effects are in the Etemenaki. Okay? Amazing statement. Verse 12. Because of this, the king became very indignant and very furious and gave orders to destroy all the wise men of Babylon. Again, because of their statement, King Nebuchadnezzar, enraged that none of the wise men that he took on in his court can tell him this dream. As a result, Nebuchadnezzar became wrathful and extremely enraged and put out an order to execute all the wise men of Babylon. By the way, this includes Daniel and his companions, okay? Which is described in verse 13. So the decree went forth that the wise men should be slain, and they looked for Daniel and his friends to kill them. Again, once more, the decree or the word from the king went out to kill all wise men. Everybody in the court is getting destroyed. Everybody. He's just, it doesn't matter who it is. If they serve me, just execute them. Okay? 86 of them. Now, the historical account shifts from all the wise men to mentioning Daniel and his companions in this text, and how those who were tasked with executing the wise men were also looking for Daniel as well. So this is kind of a sense of urgency. This is an urgent time right now, okay? Because everybody who works for the king is in trouble, okay? He's taking it out on everybody. Verse 14 and 15 says, then Daniel replied with discretion and discernment to Arioch. Remember Arioch, he's found in chapter 1. He is the captain of all of the eunuchs, the captain of the king's bodyguard, who had gone forth to slay the wise men of Babylon. And he said to Arioch, the king's commander, for what reason is the decree from the king so urgent? And Arioch informed Daniel about the matter. So, Arioch didn't come in just off with his head, everybody. With Daniel, he favored Daniel quite a bit, right? They had a relationship together. They interacted with each other. He was very close to them. We see that in chapter 1, which is why this is mentioned here. He doesn't take him or his companion's life right away. As a matter of fact, he tells him what's going on, right? In verse 16, let's continue reading here. Daniel went at once to see the king and requested one more time to tell him what the dream meant. Okay? And requested more time, rather, to tell the king what the dream meant. So Daniel, due to the urgency, Arioch tells him what's going on. Daniel quickly goes to the king and says, look, I'm not trying to die today. My friends ain't trying to die today. How about this? Give me more time. This is very risky because Daniel doesn't know whether or not he's going to get the answer or not. Okay? But Daniel, due to the urgency of the matter, went to appeal to King Nebuchadnezzar to appoint time for him. Now, how much time is not specified? He could have said 3 days. He could have said a week. He could have said a month. We don't know. But he did request more time to tell the king what the dream meant, not just the explanation of the dream, but what he dreamed, the details. Okay? Daniel chapter 2, verses 17 and 18. So I suppose Nebuchadnezzar got that request because we read in the next statements that Daniel went home and told his friends, Hananiah, Mishael, Azariah, what had happened. He urged them, that is Daniel, to ask the God of heaven to show them his mercy by telling them the secret so that they would not be executed along with other wise men of Babylon. Fascinating statement here. It says that after his discussion with the king, being able to soothe the king's anger, went back again and told his companions. Daniel also requests that they appeal to the God of heaven for an answer to this dilemma. Now, this is how my mind works, okay? So I read this text and I'm reading it, and there's just basic information here, right? Daniel goes back, he tells his companions, and he asks his companions to appeal to God for mercy, right, in revealing this dream. But this raises a question here, okay? This is how my mind works. Why does Daniel refer to God as the God of heaven? Why does he refer to him as this? Why didn't he say the Lord God, or the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, or our God, right? Why does he refer to God as the God of heaven? Well, this Aramaic statement is interesting. The Aramaic phrase is elasemanim, okay? This Aramaic phrase occurs 4 times in the book of Daniel. Daniel chapter 2, verses 18 to 19, 37 and 44, respectively, okay? By the way, this Aramaic phrase corresponds to the Hebrew phrase Elohim Samamayim, okay? The God of heaven, okay? There are some fascinating observations concerning this particular Aramaic phrase, okay? First, the Hebrew phrase, before we get to the Aramaic phrase, the Hebrew phrase Elohim Samanin occurs in the book of Ezra, chapter 1, verse 2, okay? The Aramaic phrase also is found in the book of Ezra. Okay? It is used essentially of the letters that Ezra receives, Nehemiah receives, as a result of building the temple and the effects. Okay? He uses the God of heaven. A corresponding phrase, again, can also be seen in 2 Chronicles 36:23. Okay? It's just translated in Hebrew. Why is this important? Why do I bring this up? And why is this important to Daniel 2? Well, remember what the conjurers, the magicians, the Chaldeans said about not this being impossible, right? That God doesn't reside with men. It would appear that those Babylonians or Gentiles who would read this would understand that this is not the God of the Babylonians. Remember how I told you Marduk is taking, Marduk is stealing someone else's attributes. That he's referred to as the Lord of heaven and earth. That he's the one that's referred to as the one that dwells in heaven. Marduk is to the Babylonians. So recall that Marduk was named the Lord of heaven and earth. However, when a Babylonian would read this, they would understand three things, I believe, when they would read this text concerning the God of heaven. One, that they would understand that the God of heaven and his revelation to Daniel is directly connected to the God of Israel. The Babylonians would read this and go, whoa, holy smokes. I think we got this wrong. That two, to understand that the sorcerers, the conjurers, the magicians, the witches, they do not have any revelatory abilities at all because their gods don't exist. You can't appeal to something that doesn't exist. The gods come out of their own imaginations and machinations, and they've been following these things for centuries, particularly with Marduk. And the third, in ancient times, the god of the cultures were only in control within the borders they resided in. Remember those magicians, those sorcerers that would cast spells? If you go to distant lands, that God would protect you. Again, this is why it's important when a kingdom conquered another that their gods were conquered also. When you took over a land, you took their gods with them. You renamed them. You gave them a new mythos. You gave them a new history. You gave them a new, you gave them new wives and husbands and all these things, right? This is what you did. It showed that the God that you served was weak, right? This statement demonstrated that even though Israel was in captivity, the God of Israel could not be conquered by any king, by any nation, by any person, and that the God of Israel was omnipresent. It didn't matter if the nation of Israel was in the borders of Babylon. It wouldn't have mattered. Where the gods of Babylon were only in power insofar that the Babylonians were in power, and I would even submit to you, they were only in power only because they were gods of their own imaginations. Small details, big implications within the text. There are so many details, small details within this section of scripture that underscore the importance of this situation. While the wise men of Babylon found this request from Nebuchadnezzar impossible, Daniel, knowing the weight of the situation, appeals to the God of heaven as a witness, by the way, singular, not plural, by the way, as a witness to the Babylonians in their own native language. That is important. that he is the only true and wise God. What a passage. Man, we're just getting started in chapter 2. There's tons of stuff in chapter 2. We're going to be in chapter 2 for a while, actually. So get comfortable. Let's go ahead and pray, and then we will close out this session here. Lord, so many details that we look over and gloss, but they are there for a reason. And that reason is to underscore, again, that Marduk is nothing, and that you are the God, the only wise God, holy and true, and that you reign even while Israel is in captivity in Babylon. I thank you, Lord, for this account showing us your character and who you are, and that we can recognize and give you praise, understanding, Lord, that you are the God of not only the Israelites, but also the Babylonians and the Gentiles. Thank you again so much, for it's in your Son's name.